Well, he has them. I think he has them.
Call this meeting to order. It's now 4 o'clock. And welcome to Pasadena Area Community College regular business meeting. This is February the 16th, and it's meeting number 15. May I please have the roll call, Mary?
Trustee Brown.
Here.
Trustee Wah.
Here.
Trustee Silver. Here. Trustee Chen Lao.
Here.
Trustee Fellow.
Here.
Trustee Martin.
Here.
Trustee Osterling.
Here.
Student Trustee Ramirez.
Thank you. Do we have any public comment and closed session agenda items?
We do.
Okay.
And shall I read the name and then Alex, you read the comments that were emailed? Okay. Okay. The first one I have is Shannon Maregi. I'm sorry about the last name. Are you here? Is that you? Yes. To the podium there. While you're walking up, I'll just let you know we have 3 lights that time you while you have 3 minutes total. It'll be green for 2.5 minutes. Then it'll turn amber when you have 30 seconds left, and then red at 3 minutes. And
Okay.
Alex, you'll, yeah. Or I guess I.
Yeah, you do.
Okay. Oh.
Thank you. As an adjunct instructor that's been teaching here since 2009, I can tell you that many faculty and students are very upset and don't feel heard. We've lost confidence in President Andrew Jonas due to her mismanagement of PCC during the pandemic. We ask you to remove her as superintendent president, regardless of the contract situation. When the highly transmissible Omicron was still surging, when other colleges were still remote, when local ICUs were full, and many students and teachers didn't feel safe to return to campus, we were forced to. President Andrew Jonas didn't seem to care how we felt about it, or whether we had underlying health conditions that made us vulnerable. She didn't poll students or faculty, and she didn't treat us like the stakeholders that we are. As Special Assistant to the President, Alex Buckelhide said, the timing of the return to campus is not open for negotiation. That isn't shared participatory governance. That isn't data-driven decision-making. And forcing all students and faculty to return, no matter their individual risks, isn't equitable. It runs contrary to PCC's stated mission, vision, and values. And the same thing will probably happen during the next COVID surge with her at the helm. Please remove her as superintendent president and replace her with someone who displays compassion and a willingness to engage in real shared governance. Thank you.
Okay. The next one is Catherine Cheng, and I believe this is, oh, she's here, okay.
Good afternoon, thank you. I have been a PCC employee since 2008 and have witnessed so much, remaining silent like most of us do. I am tired of each administration being worse than the previous one. What I have seen under Dr. Andrew Jonas's leadership is the last straw. The ego and the stubbornness, unwillingness to listen and compromise, disregard for people and their safety concerns, all in an effort to rush everyone back to campus during the COVID pandemic. The lack of transparency and dishonest public communication is an insult to us who see the reality. The money being thrown at us in an effort to keep us in her good graces does nothing to repair the damage that has been done. The only solution at this point is to go forth with a vote of no confidence for Dr. Andrew Jonas and move forward, hopefully, with a president that possesses the true qualities of a good leader: integrity, accountability, empathy, humility, resilience, vision, influence, and positivity. Thank you.
Okay. And so the rest are emailed remarks. So Alex?
Sure,
Okay.
thank you.
Oh, yes, correct.
Yeah. These remarks were emailed to me, and I'm reading them here for the record. The first is anonymous. Dr. Androgenis was responsible for the unilateral demand that all students and staff return to campus on January 24th with no consideration of our low-income, high-risk student population, as the Omicron virus was just plateauing and the hospitals were still overwhelmed with patients. She refused to explain the logic and reasoning behind the rush to open the campus. She would not allow the option for faculty to extend the remote learning period for 2 weeks in order to reduce stress and trauma to the at-risk students. Dr. Androgenis' administration issued direct threats to faculty who continued remote instruction to support our equity goals. Her administration has maintained a punitive posture toward faculty, threatening a label of insubordination to faculty endeavoring to provide equity in the educational access to low-income students by extending remote learning. Dr. Androgenis' insistence that all students and staff return on January 24th resulted in chaos, undue trauma, and class cancellations due to the underprepared test-administering results reporting procedures that were overwhelmed by the sheer volume of students and staff on site. Her hostile, abusive, and unreasonable behavior is incompatible with the campus community's goals for equity, shared governance, and collegiality. Her lack of concern for the safety of staff and students has created a lack of trust in her ability to lead responsibly. Her tactics of intimidation reflect offensive strategies of domination to which our campus community is vigorously opposed. Therefore, I would support a vote of no confidence in the ability of Dr. Androgenis to safely lead Pasadena City College or to champion our equity goals. The next statement is from Tracy Bodis, an adjunct faculty of kinesiology, health, and athletics. I am an adjunct faculty member who has been teaching here at Pasadena City College since 1997. I feel it is my duty to share my voice in the massive disappointment in the mismanagement of the college with the failure of implementing safe COVID practices for faculty, students, and the PCC community. This responsibility lies directly with President Androgenis and Bob Lazinski. In solidarity with an unprecedented amount of faculty who share the same feeling as I, we strongly urge and advise the Board of Trustees to immediately remove the President and her co-superintendent, Bob Lazinski. Under no circumstances should hostility permeate our campus environment, coupled with the refusal of having open dialogue about safety issues, while we are in the midst of a global pandemic between the head of all administration and faculty. Androgenis made it clear that she did not care about how we felt. She would not hear our ideas or voices in regards to even delaying instruction face-to-face 1 or 2 more weeks with Omicron everywhere, like so many colleges and universities across this great state did delay. Not to be confused with canceling face-to-face, but merely delaying instruction for a mere additional 14 days. The refusal alone to talk and negotiate with faculty gives the appearance of unwillingness for fruitful dialogue for the greater good. This does not resemble shared governance as touted by this institution. Remove her as president of PCC. This college is a diamond of an institution and deserves to be led by someone who genuinely exhibits kindness and compassion and who is truly dedicated to shared governance. The next comment is from Professor Melissa Michelson. Dear Trustee Brown, please do not quash the public's voice by not read comments aloud. At your mid-January meeting, you chose not to read the comments of faculty aloud, but rather tucked away their letters about their disapproval of the administration's premature and draconian mandate to return to face-to-face classes in the height of Omicron. The President's evaluation is on your closed session agenda today. I just want to inform you that the faculty at PCC seem to be in the process of putting together a vote of no confidence on the President. I urge this board, whatever comes of that, not to ignore how the professors feel at the school, like many of you did, specifically Trustees Brown, Waugh, Martin, and Fellow, after you hired Mark Rocha and he got several votes of no confidence from both the students and the faculty, and then you gave him a raise and extended his contract. You too got a votes of no confidence from the faculty and the students, which are on your own record. Finally, you sent him off with a $400,000 supposed retirement package of PCC's funds and taxpayer dollars, after which he got hired in Orange County and again at San Francisco City College, where he wreaked havoc and just recently got a settlement package to leave their school too. Please listen to your faculty and listen to your students. Thank you. The last one is also anonymous. To the Board of Trustees members, on the question of evaluating Superintendent President Erica Androgenis, I have a few questions. I'll begin by saying that I do not know Dr. Androgenis on a personal level, but she described herself as like a gardener in the article she wrote in Pasadena Now, which some people might consider a public attempt at revisionist history. One has to wonder, using her own metaphor, what is she actually sowing, and upon whose backs and efforts and toil does she stand, self-satisfied, after the debacle of the outcome of her forced return to campus that began on January 24th, 2022. Other questions to consider are, does she really believe the execution of the testing itself was a success, as she wrote in Pasadena Now? Does she really believe that forcing faculty and students back on campus at the height of the worst surge of the pandemic yet was a successful policy, as she wrote in Pasadena Now? Does she really believe it was appropriate to write that article of self-praise to try to erase the reality of what was happening at that time? Does she really believe she has the trust and well wishes of the faculty, staff, and students of Pasadena City College after what many would call a serious lapse in judgment and leadership? Does her attempt at self-aggrandizement hold up to the actualities experienced by thousands of faculty, staff, and students since the forced return to campus on January 24th? Perhaps the most important questions to ask, considering all the above, is Dr. Androgenis actually capable of accepting reality as it is, instead of the erroneous and misrepresentative manner of how she has presented it to be at the press? Is she capable of learning from her past mistakes? And is she capable of regaining the trust of the PCC community, considering such egregious conduct, judgment, and lack of regard shown to PCC's faculty, students, and staff? The honest answer to the last question does not seem to be the most obvious one. No. Sorry, does seem to be the most obvious one. No. Board of Trustees, I believe we may need a new gardener, or at least this community needs a new leader and a superintendent president who actually does seem to be attuned to the reality of where we all are in the PCC community, instead of an administrator who appears to be lost in a garden of chaos of her own making. That's you. Thank you.
Is that it? Thank you. Okay, so now we are going to recess to closed session, and the agenda items that are on our closed session are as follows. 1, Government Code 54957, Public Employee Appointment, Vice President, Economic and Workforce Development. Item 2, Government Code 54957.6, Conference with Labor Negotiators. Agency Designated Representative Robert S. Blizinski, Assistant Superintendent, Vice President of Human Resources. Item number 3, Government Code 54956.8, Conference with Real Property Negotiator, address possible satellite location 325 North Santa Anita, Arcadia, California, District Negotiator Candace D. Jones, Negotiating Party, discussion only. Item number 4, Governor Code 54957, Evaluation of Superintendent President. We will recess to close session at this time. Where are we going?
We're going downstairs. Right? To the circadian?
Let's get settled.
Stay there with him, but I got a call from the attorney after. Oh, wow.
Is everybody here?
I'm sorry, that's so.
Okay, we're back from closed session, and I do have one reportable item that we need to bring to your attention. According to the board bylaws 2345 and 2350, anonymous public comments are not permitted, so we will remove those comments from the record of these meetings. Thank you. So I think we received maybe one or two anonymous, so those will be stricken. They will not be part of our records. Okay, so we had no other business to report.
Okay.
Okay, so at this time, we will have the roll call, please.
Brown,
Here.
Trustee Waugh,
Here.
Trustee Silver,
Here?
Trustee Chen Lao,
Here.
Trustee Fellow,
Here.
Trustee Martin,
Here.
Trustee Osterling,
Here.
Student Trustee Ramirez.
Here.
Okay, great, thank you. So we're now going to move to item number 3, land acknowledgement, which will be done by Trustee Waugh, to be followed by our Pledge of Allegiance, which will be done by Trustee Osterling. So, Trustee Waugh?
Okay. Pasadena City College is a learning community within the indigenous homelands of people who have been known as the Gabrieleño Band of Mission Indians and of the Xixiiquanagua village and the Kish Nation. Tonight, we acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced removal from this land on which we gather. Let us take a moment of silence in honor of the important contributions of the stewards of this land who came before us. PCC and its faculty, staff, and students recognize that we are all simultaneously teachers, learners, and guests on these lands. This land acknowledgement is a small part of an ongoing process of working to be in good relationship with the people of the land and embodying equity in our practices and policies.
Thank you.
Please stand and join me for the pledge. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So next on the agenda is a resolution number 710 authorizing remote teleconferences meeting of the Board of Trustees. Do we need to take a vote on that?
Yes.
Move to approve. Second.
Okay, so all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, so passed unanimously. Thank you. Okay, let's see where we are now. Okay, so we are now going to
Approve the agenda.
committee and other college bodies required. What? Okay. Where am I?
We should be number 6.
Approval and reordering of agenda items. Thank you very much.
Motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor? Okay. Unanimous vote. Item 7, introduction and recognitions. Do we have any?
We do not.
No introductions and, good. Okay, do we have public comment and non-agenda items?
We do.
Please proceed.
Okay. First speaker, Alex Shaganaka. And again, I'll repeat, you have 3 minutes to speak. The green light will be on for the first 2.5 minutes, the amber for your last 30 seconds, and the red at the end of your time.
All right. Morning. Morning. My name is Anonymous Non-Agenda. How are you doing? I forgot. Okay, yeah, I remember now. Bridgewater College, campus, college, 2 officers get shot. City of Pasadena, 2.5 miles away from PCC, 14 years old kid gets shot. New York, city of New York, all 2 officers get ambushed, get shot. What does those means to the Board of Trustees? What does those mean to the PCC police officer safety? What does that mean to the PCC campus safety? I guess to PCC Board of Trustees, those means nothing at all. A little bit of spin-off. Let's talk about another one of my favorite comments, which is the PCC student service. Student service is have the same characteristics with my boyfriend. They like to play the game. It's called Hard to Get. Somebody knows that during the pandemic, Los Angeles Unified School District, they closed all of the in-person operation like every other school, right? We all know that. But there's one thing that they never shut down in-person operation, even though it's the pandemic. It's called food distribution, because they understand students go to school not only to study, they also need to get those food meal, right? It's their lifeline. They understand that. For PCC students who never had any transportation, our lifeline is the U-Pass. And then I just received a confirmation from the office, upper stairs from the bookstore, that PCC summer semester, this is a super long summer semester, 3 months and a half, there will be no U-Pass offered for this year. Well, every year, actually, every single year. And then that literally means something for PCC students who never had transportation. That means students who don't have U-Pass during the summer, they cannot go to work. They cannot go to a medical appointment. They cannot go to school. And then, because I have only 3 minutes, I can just give you these 3 examples. So for the LAUSD, the food is the student's lifeline. For PCC students who don't have transportation, specifically for me, PCC U-Pass is my lifeline. So literally, no U-Pass during the summer, I'm getting fired. There's no way I can take, take me 3 buses to go to work. There's no way I can continue my employment. So what does that mean to the PCC Board of Trustees?
That's 3 minutes.
Not too much. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next is the approval of the,
Oh, no.
you have another one? I'm sorry.
Another speaker, Melissa Michelson.
Hello, I'll be reading remarks from Melissa Michelson. Dear Board of Trustees, why isn't there an electric vehicle shuttle transporting students to the CEC rather than the gas-guzzling shuttle that drives around in circles nonstop or stands idle all day while waiting for students? We have electric vehicle charging stations, but we can't have 1 or 2 electric or hybrid shuttles. I have heard that they have put in for an electric replacement for the past 4 years, but so far, nothing. This should be a priority, and it's embarrassing and painful that our college is contributing in this way to the climate emergency. Please immediately retire the gas guzzlers and go green. Thank you.
And that's all.
That's all, thank you. Okay, so next is the approval of our regular business meeting, number 14. Do we have a motion?
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Okay, all in favor? Unanimous vote. Okay, now we have board committees reporting out, information item. Do we have any? Go ahead, Trustee Wall.
Yeah, the Legislative Committee met this past week, and you'll see our recommendations under this agenda item for the approval of the board policies. Also, Legislative met with Representative Judy Chu this past week, and we went over some issues that we didn't have a chance to go over with her when we were in DC. So some of the things that she was really interested in were, how we were doing with our classes, what we were doing with our small business center, and then our veterans, how the medical clinic was doing. So those are three things that she's been very supportive of, and Dr. Androgenis gave some really great updates. I'm sure you'll give it into your report, but she was very pleased with the progress that we've made.
Thank you. Any other committee reporting out? Thank you, Trustee Wall. Okay, our next on the agenda is update on DEI initiative.
I believe Dr. Bolin has an update.
Good evening, Board of Trustees. Just a few highlights from the college's EDJ work. Includes, Trustee Wall, you'll be so excited to hear, we hosted our first Leading for Change Consortium on Friday, February 11th. I shared in some previous spaces our desire to gather our diversity scholar practitioners, leaders within the California community colleges, to do some networking around organizational diversity, equity, inclusion efforts. And out of those 116 schools, we had 57 that responded to the invitation and 20 that were able to join us last Friday. And that was a fantastic time. I wasn't sure sort of what the ethos would be in this space in regards to capacity and sort of need for this space, but on the onset, we had folks like, thank you, thank you, thank you. We needed this sort of opportunity to do some coalition building. We need this opportunity for camaraderie and need some opportunity to do some information sharing around promising practices. So I'm really excited about sort of the future of that community space. In the same vein of informing sort of policy and practices, we recently acquired the final results and report for the National Assessment of Collegiate Campus Climates, our NAC report. It's a survey that was administered in spring 2021 through the USC Race and Equity Center, and it was sort of positioned to provide us some data about our students' views and perceptions of the institution's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, to the extent to which sort of they interact meaningfully around this work, are able to have some deep conversations, and feel as though, you know, they're able to sort of contribute to their global citizenship. So we only had a response rate of 15.3%, but as you remember, sort of the context as to where we were for the spring, still being remote and all of that good stuff, and it represented about 3,400 students. So I think it's still a good sort of pulse and snapshot around sort of racial literacy and the experiences of mattering and affirmation with our students. So we're working with our liaison, Dan Wynn, from Institutional Effectiveness to build out our infograph and our kind of truncated version of the report to share with you all in our efforts to give you kind of a pulse. I think sort of a 2.0 to that is a partnership that we have with Institutional Effectiveness and the PRT team to administer a spring cultural and racial climate survey for all stakeholders, or all campus stakeholders rather. So that's our employees, that's our staff, our employees and our students. So looking forward to that. And that will sort of focus on, everything from one's capacity to engage in conversations around race, sort of what their workplace environment is feeling like, all the way to sort of their feelings around voice as it relates to decision making at the college. So I'm really excited about this partnership with PRT as they focus on communication and collegiality from this sort of DEI lens. We are continuing our leading edge professional learning series in the spring, so talk to you all about sort of building that individual capacity around advancing this work. This will be our other sort of skill building opportunity with the focus on racial literacy. We have our keynote speaker on the 23rd, and then we'll have 4 2-hour learning spaces to follow beginning March 18th. I'm really excited about this. You know, we talk about kind of in sort of my, community of diversity practitioners that there's not a lot of research around, trainings, reducing bias, but what it does do is that it reduces noise, right? Those sort of errors that we make as a byproduct of our bias. And so that's essentially what we're trying to do in, our professional learning series as we sort of build ongoing awareness, skill, and commitment building of individuals around EDJ work. So we're excited about that. EDI, we've been partnering with our new faculty seminar folks and new employee orientation. So as we talk about inviting our new faculty and our new employees to the institution and our organizational commitment and culture around inclusion and belonging, we'll be able to kind of, share out our expectations around there and start to set some core values as it relates to that. And so I'm excited and grateful to Dean Reinhardt for the invitation to influence the curriculum for new faculty orientation and human resources to allow us to participate in that orientation for our new employees. And finally, we welcome Megan Staudenross An inaugural role as our Title IX investigator manager. She really has already hit the ground running, getting us up to speed in regards to our policies and all of that good stuff and language. She'll be working on not just investigations and complaints, but also providing preventative education for employee training and our reimagination of a culture of care around T9. That's it.
Anyone have any questions for Dr. Bolin? There you go. Not so quick, honey. Go ahead.
Thanks, Dr. Boland. I'm really pleased to hear this interweaving of the coalition building, and that's a little bit about what I'm going to talk about in DEI also. So we got about 50 students who participated. Did I hear that right?
For the Leading for Change Consortium. So that was for the colleges. So out of the 116 California community colleges, we had 57 that responded to our invitation. And that was an invitation for any diversity practitioners doing this work, leading this work within their colleges. And of that, 20 participated in our sort of orientation space on Friday.
Okay. And I really liked that you covered, you really are targeting the new employees who are coming in, because this actually is a conversation that we trustees at the state level had. Trustee Silver and I were working at the state level, and we did also agree that we really needed to look at making sure that we go after the new people first to make sure that we're setting that tone of culture and that lens. So of all the stakeholders that participated in this, was it were all groups represented, or just certain ones at this time, and you're going to weave in others, or how was that going to be layered?
For the consortium,
Right.
that is just focused on practitioners. So diversity practitioners that are leading this work and creating sort of a networking space for us and an opportunity for us to think through collectively, sort of shifting policy and practice within the California Community Colleges system. For our climate surveys, I mean, that's when we'll be able to bring in the voice for all our stakeholders in relationship to the work that we're doing. And hopefully in our efforts to kind of, Trustee Chen-La, what she had asked, earlier on in regards to what does that equity and excellence audit look like? This will be a form of that and hopefully inform, practices moving forward.
Okay, great. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing that survey. Thank you.
Thank
Any
you.
other questions? Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I do have a DI update for the state level. Is that okay?
Okay, go ahead,
I
Trustee
will be
Watt.
quick. Okay, so we did have DEI discussion. As you know, Trustee Silver is also one of the chairs on the Phase 2 implementation at the statewide DEI. And we talked about the March 17th town hall that is coming up. We will be focusing on the EEO plans. Dr. Bull will be coming in and talking about that, and we'll be talking about what the trustees' role is, and all stakeholders are going to be invited to this, so I hope we'll see a lot of people. I know Dr. Androgenis represents the CEOs on this, so we're really looking forward to how we can really move DEI and really use the EEO as an instrument to do that. And I don't know, Trustee Silver, if you had anything to add on that.
Oh, it just is going to be a crackerjack, old-fashioned term, panel that pulls views from the whole system. And I think it'll be very interesting, very practical, and worth your time. March 17th.
So I'm sure you will send me an invite?
Yes, and the flyers are being printed now, or I guess they've already been created. They're just being modified so that we can send it out tomorrow.
The pixels are drying right now.
That's right. Tammy picked the right pictures, and we went with her recommendation.
Sounds great. That will be very good, and I look forward to participating. Please don't volunteer me. I'm there to listen.
Well, actually, we do have a volunteer from our board, so Trustee Ramirez will actually be part of the...
Very good, Trustee Ramirez. Great.
Just a quick question on that. Is that our regular scheduled trustee webinars, i.e., is it already on my calendar?
So it's on the town hall, so we'll be doing anywhere between 4 and 6 town halls per year, really focusing on bringing DEI through the system.
All right, I've got those on my calendar.
Great,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys, for your hard work. Trustee Watt, Trustee Silver, Dr. Bolin, hopefully will make a difference. Okay, now we are going to go to item number 12, community feedback on potential facilities bond.
Okay, and I'm going to turn it over to Vice President Candace Jones.
Good evening, trustees. As an extension of our ongoing conversation about a potential bond in 2022, Back, if you remember, in late last year, we talked about what that timeline would look like and what are the steps in which we would consider a bond moving forward for our November 2022 election. Out of that, we've entered in this feasibility study phase, and a piece of that is doing some polling of the local community and their thoughts around the potential bond. The district has partnered with TBWBH, Props and Measure, who are leaders, really leaders in this space around strategy and communication related to bond measures. They've got hundreds, like over 500 successful bond measures, and so we really wanted to partner with folks who know our community really well as building strategy and consensus as we move forward. This evening, I'd like to invite and welcome both Tim McClarney, who's going to speak and give us a little bit of feedback around our survey results, as well as Charles Heath.
Thank you. Good evening, Madam and members of the board. I'm Dr. Tim McClarney. I'm the president of True North Research, and we're working in conjunction with TBWBH, Props and Measures, and our specialty is the polling. So the first part of this presentation is going to deal with the results of the survey we completed, and then I will hand it off at the end of that to Charles for a couple slides at the back. A little bit about us. We started our company 20 years ago, and we specialize in working with public agencies, so cities, counties, school districts, community college districts, and using surveys to develop a statistically reliable understanding of the communities and the customers that they serve. My business partner and I, over the past 20 years, have worked on over 1,200 research studies for public agencies, and about half of the work that we do these days is what we call revenue measure feasibility studies, like what we're going to be talking about here tonight, where the goal is to understand if it's feasible to move forward with some type of bond or tax measure for an agency, and if it is feasible, how might they go about structuring that measure in a way that it's consistent with the type of measure that their community is interested in supporting. We've helped a lot of agencies have success. To date, we've helped raise over $34 billion in voter-approved measures around the state. And I mention this for context because as I go through tonight's presentation, or perhaps in response to questions I may have from the board later on, I may make reference to how the results here compared to what we might typically see for agencies that go on the ballot. And I just want you to have a sense from the experience base from which I'll be speaking. I also welcome questions from the board as I go, or at the end, whichever is your preference. Okay, so before we talk about the results, it's helpful to take a moment to review the purpose of the study, or why we go about doing this research, as well as the methodology. In terms of the purpose, I see these studies as sort of designed to answer three overarching questions. The first is to answer that simple question of, is it feasible? And what I mean by feasible is if you as a board were to choose to place this measure on the November 2022 ballot, does it have a reasonable chance of success, right? Sometimes we do this research, and no matter how you look at the data, there's really no way to get you from where you are today to where you need to be viable on election day. And if that's the case, I'll be the first person to tell you that. When there is feasibility, that second bullet there kicks in gear, which is how do you go about structuring this measure in a way that it's consistent with the type of measure that your community has indicated it's willing to support. So there's a lot of components to a bond project, right, or a bond proposal. There's, how are you going to use the money? What sort of facility improvements are you looking to fund with the proceeds of this bond? There's the price tag, that's the bond amount and the underlying tax rate. There's issues of accountabilities that can be built into a measure. There's questions about election timing sometimes. So all of these types of questions that you need to be answered ultimately before you place this measure on the ballot, that's something that the poll is designed to help guide. And then finally, it's an opportunity for us to understand kind of how important information is to your voters' opinions about this proposal, and to help gather information that's going to assist you as a community college district in educating, communicating with your voters about the proposal. I'm a big proponent of the fact that if a public agency is going to take the step of placing a revenue measure on the ballot and asking their voters to make a choice, it's really incumbent upon that agency to educate and inform voters about the choice you're asking them to make, right? You want them going into the ballot box with a good understanding of the proposal that you've put in front of them so they can make an informed decision. In terms of the methodology or how we went about conducting the study, data collection was conducted in January. We use what's called a stratified and clustered random sampling method, which I can get into the details of it if you like, but suffice to say that what that does is ensures that at the end of our data collection process, we have a sample of likely November 2022 voters that is representative of your larger November 2022 electorate on all of the dimensions that are related to how people tend to vote on tax measures and bond measures. So age, gender, partisanship, household party type, all of those things we control for so that we have a perfectly representative sample at the end of that process. We wound up speaking with 842 likely November voters. We used, once we had selected our sample, we used what's called a mixed method approach where we recruited using multiple recruiting methods, so email, text, and telephone. We gave respondents the flexibility of participating either on telephone or online at a password-protected website. Interview on average is about 16 minutes. I didn't mention it here in the bullets, but respondents had the option of completing the survey in either English, Spanish, or Mandarin. And because this was a random sample of 842 and not a census of all of your likely November voters, it has what's known as a margin of error due to sampling. In this case, that's plus or minus 3.4%. And what that means is we can be 95% confident that the results I will share with you tonight are within 3.4% of what we would have found had we spoken with all of your likely voters. Yes, sir.
Can I interrupt with a question on this? When you sample likely voters and you recruit them and only those that respond are then interviewed, does that lead to some sampling bias?
So that's a great question.
Yeah.
So one of the neat things about the stratified and clustered random sample is that we control to some degree for that response bias. And so what we essentially do is we take that voter file, we isolate your likely November 2022 voters, and then we break that file up based on all those characteristics that we know are related to voting behavior. So age, gender, location within the district, partisanship, household party type, and that's actually the most important, right? If I know somebody's a Republican, that tells me something about how they might vote on a tax measure. If I know they live with another Republican, that tells me a whole lot more, right? Because what you tend to find is that a respondent's living arrangement actually shapes their behavior, political behavior, in a way that is above and beyond whatever their own partisanship is, right? If you live in a mixed household, you argue about politics, you tend to sort of mitigate each other to some degree. But when you share the partisanship of your housemates, you reinforce each other. So we control for all those things and we build clusters. Each cluster is a multidimensional profile. So if I knew, for example, that 5% of your likely November electorate are Democratic females who live with another Democrat, are between 50 and 60 years of age and live in a particular part of the district, we ensure that 5% of the clusters in our sample represent that profile. Then we randomly select people into their clusters. And so if you have a case where I can't reach somebody, right, or they refuse to take the survey, I don't replace them with a random another person, which could start to lead to some response bias. I replace somebody with somebody who shares their exact same profile, and it's that profile that is so predictive of how they tend to vote.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
And I think you've answered my question twice in his answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So we do have a very vast district, and you mentioned location, and I obviously represent an area that's more vast and far away than the heartland right here where we sit. And so when you are sensitive to location, are you sensitive to the fact of our trustee areas, and which by and large represent other school districts and other cities, so you don't have to be sensitive to our numbers, 1 through 7, but at least to those other communities?
Yeah, absolutely.
Equal sampling.
Absolutely. And we also, recognize that when you get into larger districts, right, where certain facilities may be more concentrated in parts of the district than others, that can create an awareness disparity, and it can create a sort of a buy-in disparity when it comes to these types of measures. And so one of the stratification criteria is geography, right? And so we're making sure we're spreading these interviews in a way. Now, the other piece is that doesn't mean we go equal across supervisorial districts or equal across trustee areas, because what you find is that these boundaries are based on population. They're not necessarily based on voting propensity, right? So even within these, a lot of places have fresh new districts that were drawn. They're equal on on population. But if you look at the actual voting propensities within these areas, sometimes you can get pretty big disparities in terms of turnout, right? And at the end of the day, what we want to be is representative of the people who are actually going to show up and cast a ballot. And so you might have some unevenness across the geography, of the district based on propensity, not response bias.
Thank you.
Sure.
I have a question. On the 16-minute average interview length, the interview is conducted, the data collection is via telephone and online. Interview is telephone or?
Correct.
Or focus groups?
No, so it's a telephone interview. The 16-minute applies to that telephone interview scenario where you have an interviewer, reading questions to a respondent and the respondent answering. The online version of it goes faster because they can read for themselves, right, and self-administer. So that one tends to be more like 12 minutes.
Go ahead, Trustee Wall.
So I don't know if you would be addressing this later, but I know that there are other areas within our other communities and other school districts that are looking at bonds. Are you taking into account that there could be bond fatigue, that there could be problems, and then approving then a much larger bond when you have all these other local bonds going through?
And anytime that we there's the polling and then there's taking the polling, layering on all these other additional considerations about whether to make recommendations about moving forward, and if so, how, right? We have certainly been in situations where you have 3 overlapping bond measures on the same ballot, right? You have a community college district, then you have a nested high school district, and within there you might have nested elementary school districts. In reality, that's kind of the nature of the elections we find ourselves in these days, because these Prop 39 bonds are consolidated down to either the June primaries or the November generals. There are no more special election bond measures really in the California. It certainly can't do that with a Prop 39 bond. So that scenario described is pretty common. We do take it into consideration though. Ideally, the other thing that we have to think about is, to what extent there may be a statewide bond on the ballot. And, there's the impression sometimes that, well, that can create competition because they see the statewide bond. But in actuality, from a messaging standpoint, that you can often judo that into a positive, because as a local jurisdiction, right, as a community college district, if that's on the ballot, you can make the point that, look, in order for us to get our fair share of that state bond money, we need to have a local match, right? So all of these things definitely come into play, and I know Charles here is, his role in some ways is to not only take the polling numbers, but to layer all these additional considerations on in terms of, okay, should we be moving forward, and how? Okay, great questions. So let me jump in with the results. So this first slide shows the results of what we call our importance of issues question. And for each of the issues you see on the left side of that figure, we simply ask respondents to tell us, how important is this to you? Is it extremely important or very important? The combination of those two percentages is in that box off to the right. Is it somewhat important, not at all important? That's represented by the negative space off to the right. We asked this in a random order, each of these items for each respondent, but we have sorted them from high to low here based on that combined percentage of those who told us it was either extremely or very important. We asked this question really for 2 reasons. One, it's a great warm-up, right? It makes good on that promise at the beginning of the interview that this is a survey about important issues, and so we get right to that. It gets the juices flowing, gets them sort of thinking about local issues, but it's also an opportunity for us to understand how education as an issue stacks up against some of these other issues that also compete for tax dollars. And in particular, how does the issue of education stack up against the issue of preventing local tax increases, right? Rough rule of thumb, but it makes a lot of sense. The more importance that voters tend to place on education issues relative to preventing local tax increases, the better positioned you are to move forward with some type of tax measure related to education, right? When you look at this list, number 1 issue, addressing homelessness, this is a number 1 issue in a lot of communities around the state at 86%, extremely and very important. Number 2, ensuring local access to an affordable, high quality college education and career training at 79%. Then improving public safety, creating jobs, and improving the local economy, which has a nexus to a bond, protecting the environment, et cetera. As you go down the list, you'll see preventing local tax increases second up from the bottom at 52%. If you take the 79% assigned to ensuring local access to an affordable, high-quality education and career training, subtract out that percentage for preventing local tax increases, you get a gap there of about 27%. That is a little higher, frankly, than what we normally see. So that's a good sign, right? We want, the bigger the gap in that way, the better positioned you are to move forward. The other thing to point out, though, is there's this issue kind of 4 up from the bottom, repairing aging classrooms and facilities at our local community colleges. You see that that checks in lower in terms of importance than that broader issue at the top about ensuring access to an affordable college education at 56%. I point that out not because it's unusual, and in fact, it's always the case that when you narrow to the issue of facilities, you have lower importance assigned to that than the broader question of education. And I pointed out simply to remind us all that even though bonds are about facilities, right, at the end of the day, what voters care about isn't so much the facilities, they care about what happens inside those facilities. And so it's a reminder that as you move forward to the bond measure, you always need to be connecting the dots with voters between what it is you're doing facility-wise, but why it matters in terms of your core mission of educating students. So right after that initial question about importance of issues, we get to what we call the initial ballot test. And the idea is, before I get any deeper into this interview and I start talking in more detail about possible tax rates, about how the bond proceeds could be spent, arguments pro and con, I want to present to voters a mock-up of what we think that 75-word ballot statement could look like and get their reaction. It is a really good gauge of where your voters are at on the natural with respect to this proposal, because we've kind of hit them cold turkey with the ballot language. We haven't given them any other additional information. You will notice as you get to the bottom, there's a lot of mumbo jumbo about dollars and cents here. We're testing in this what's called a split sample study, where we tested 2 different bond levels with 2 different underlying tax rates. So a random half of the sample received a bond at $698 million, which would require a 2.5 cent tax rate per $100 of assessed value. And the other half got a smaller bond amount at $565 with a 2 cent tax rate per $100 of assessed value. And so I mention that because as we go through the next slide, you'll see we break it out by the big bond and the small bond. It's based on that bond amount and the tax rate. So that's the language we presented, and here are the results. At that initial ballot test, the big bond on the left, we found 62% of respondents were willing to support that, yet about 29% who were opposed and the rest unsure. The smaller bond, the $565 million, you had a little stronger support. It makes sense at 65% support, 25% opposed, and about 10% unsure.
Quick question.
Oh, yes.
How does the assessment for the big bond and the little bond compare to the maximum allowable assessment that?
So the 698 would be about your max because it's based on a 2.5 cent tax rate per $100 of assessed, which lines up with a $25 per 100,000 of assessed tax rate, which is the Prop 39 max for a community college district. So that would be your max. The one to the right is a step down, right? That's at essentially a $20 per 100,000 of assessed valuation tax rate.
And for how many years would that assessment?
While bonds are outstanding, I didn't run the financials. Typically, these things tend to run about 30 years.
Right. Understood. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I have a question.
Sure.
I always seem to follow Jim with a question, but so you mentioned that the sample was 842 voters.
Mm-hmm.
And you may have mentioned this and I may have missed it, but not all of them answered this question, right? So how would you know how many of the 800 specifically answered the question on the bond?
Yeah, the 842 was split evenly. So half received a 698. It's the same exact ballot language, only the amount of the bond and the tax rate was varied, right? And one was higher, one was lower. So all 842 respondents were asked the question. Half got the higher amount, half got the lower amount.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So at 62 and 65% support, for a Prop 39 bond to pass in the state of California, you need 55%. So you're about 7 points above that 55% threshold with that larger bond, and you are about 10 points above that threshold with the smaller bond. Mm-hmm. By the way, just as a sort of piece of information to share, we had actually done a similar type of poll back in 2020 for the district, right? And obviously that was middle of the pandemic, and ultimately the decision was not to move forward. But on that poll, your initial ballot test was at 62%. So it was similar to that larger bond, but a little lower than the smaller bond. And I'll have that same comparison for you as I get to the other ballot tests. So voter support for a bond measure naturally can depend on the price tag, right? The higher the tax rate, all other things being equal, the lower level support you might expect for a bond. And so one of the objectives of the survey, just in case they didn't pick that up in that 75 words, was to make it really clear that bonds mean taxes, right? And to then test several different tax rates with them to see, if you put the blinders on somebody and you say, forget about what we're going to build, we're going to focus on the tax rate, how do they react to each one of those tax rates? So we tested 3 different tax rates, $25 per 100,000 of assessed at the top, then 20, then 14. And you can see that when you put the blinders on a respondent and you make them focus on the price tag to the exclusion of the benefits, that's a bit of a wet blanket on voter support for your proposal. And so at $25, we had 50% support. At $20, 54% support. And at $14, we had 60% support. Now, the other thing we know about this test here is that not everybody knows what assessed valuation means, right? People have a tendency to overestimate the AV for their house. They tend to think market rate instead of what they're actually taxed on. And the nature of the question requires you to do math pretty quickly in your head in the space of an interview, and not everybody's good at that either, right? And so what happens is, as you're asking these questions, they know you're talking about the price tag. Some of them might not know what it is that adds up to, and when that's the case, people tend to hedge, right? People tend to say no or not sure rather than yes. And so we also go about it another way in the poll. So we say, all right, let me put it another way. If you knew this measure would cost the typical homeowner about $128 per year, would you vote yes or no on the bond measure? That's that left column. The $128 per year is the max tax rate, that $25 tax rate, multiplied times the median assessed value for a residential property in your district. That's how you get to $128. So those two things are comparable. And what you find is when you take the mystery out of it, right? You don't talk about this mysterious tax rate. You just say it's going to cost typical homeowner $128 a year. You get a more favorable reaction to that number because it makes sense, right? They understand what you're talking about. And so at $128 per year, we had 57% support, right? Which is about 7 points higher than when we talked about it as a $25 per 100,000 assessed valuation tax rate. The column on the right is the exact same exercise, only here we're using that $14 tax rate, right, per 100,000 assessed value. You multiply that out times the median AV, you get $71 per year. And at $71 per year, we are at 66% support. So all of this information is just helpful because one of the important questions you have to answer before you decide to put a measure on the ballot is what's the price tag going to be, right? What is that tax rate? And this information kind of guides us there. Okay, now after this we transition to what we call the projects and programs section of our poll, and the idea here is twofold. We are first now starting to educate this respondent more about what your proposal will accomplish, right? Up till this point we only had that 75-word ballot statement. You can only say so much in 75 words about what the bond will do. Here we get to unpack that bond into all these different types of projects that would be funded, and in that way, respondents are learning more about your proposal. The other thing it allows us to do is to understand of all the things you can spend the money on, how do your voters feel about those items, right? Which of these kind of rise to the top of the list in terms of their priorities? And is there anything in your list that I would call an anchor? And what I mean by that is voters don't like it. They don't want to see it in your project list, and if you were to put it in your bond, it's going to serve to weigh down your measure on the ballot. And so the first sort of obvious takeaway from this slide is that there are no anchors, right? Every single project we tested there had over 60% of voters say that they would favor spending some of the bond proceeds on that item, and in fact, most of those, all but 3, had 75% plus of your voters say that they would favor spending some of the money of the bond on that type of project. At the top of the list, though, you see sort of basic repairs, roofs, plumbing, faulty electrical systems, replacing dry rotted beams, that sort of stuff. Sometimes that's not the sexiest project, but what you find consistently when it comes to voters and what they're willing to tax themselves for, they understand the need to take care of what you already have, right? You don't necessarily need to dangle something shiny and new in front of them. The idea of sort of taking care of the facilities that you already have, as you can see here, was the #1 project on the list. Keeping your computer systems and structural technology up to date was #2. And then upgrading classrooms, career training facilities for science tech engineering, math, computer science, so that's sort of your STEM items. But the big picture is you look down that list, there's about a dozen projects for which 75% plus of your voters say they would favor spending some of the bond proceeds on. Okay.
Question.
Yes.
So let me address what isn't on the list that you briefly addressed. And that is, we've had discussions, and obviously if you followed our agenda, we are looking into satellite campuses in various parts of the district. So something new and shiny, shall we say, in your vernacular. And yet that wasn't really on here to give us any kind of guidance as to whether that would be an anchor or whether that would be maybe number one on the list. I mean, it could go either way.
John, it's on the third from the bottom, is addressing that at least in part.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, improving classrooms and facilities at satellite campus so all students have equal access to facilities.
And I'm going to disagree because, see, again, the first word you read is improve.
New.
Not new, improve.
Okay. So,
and one of our considerations, as on our agenda tonight, for example, is new.
Okay.
And so I'm just wondering.
Now, are you creating new campuses, or is it new construction on existing campuses?
We are looking into a potential new campuses.
Okay.
And we have one satellite campus that is going to be going away, or scheduled to go away, that we need to replace with a new campus.
So, not to take issue with your issue taking here, this is about improving facilities on a satellite campus. I get it. You can see, though, it's sort of third up from the bottom, right? So it doesn't quite test as well as a lot of the other items. What we tend to find is, in most of these items, when you look in here, they're a what, they're not a where. Meaning, what are we going to build, not where are we going to build it. The moment you start plopping a project in a particular location, right, it's going to be more attractive to those within the vicinity of that, but tends to be less attractive to others further out in the district because they don't see the benefit, right, because it's further away. So happy to talk, about what our experience has been with satellite campuses, but generally speaking, if you're going to do that, you got to make sure, when you're doing a bond measure like this, you need to make sure that everyone's going to benefit. If you're asking somebody to pay for this bond, they need to see some benefit from this, right? And so in some ways, a satellite campus can help with that, right? But you need to make sure that those who aren't going to be going to that satellite campus see other value in this bond so that, the fact that that satellite campus is going to be one of the things that's funded doesn't become a deterrent to them.
Yeah, and I appreciate that comment. But I guess what I was, because every verb on here, or, repair, improve, upgrade,
modernize,
it was all centered on a certain tact. And we're kind of thinking of an almost different tact of the satellite campus. So not so much improving satellite versus main, but just the tact of trying to make education more accessible by satellite campuses, and how important is that? And I don't know if that would at some place warrant, or if there's time, another survey to try to work to get some kind of read on that. But I think maybe in some ways your comment that every corner of the district needs to see benefit in the bond, and obviously those close to the heartland here see a lot of benefit in the improvements here at our main campus. So that's pretty, that's pretty evident. So anyway, we'll go with that statement for the moment. But I was curious along that line.
Hi, to piggyback on John's question, it's that there's nothing that addresses new construction anywhere of anything.
So I don't know that it's precluded from this. When you talk about things like upgrading, you talk about improving, right? That can be improving. When you talk about improving access to these things, that can be new construction, right?
Okay, so, does it read differently to voters in your experience for other campaigns, talking about improving versus building new?
I will say that in general, when you talk about, for example, we do this with school districts that are looking to build a new campus because they have overcrowding, right? And
Or a building on the existing campus.
Yeah, new buildings on existing campuses, voters just tend to see that as an improvement, right? It doesn't have to be an improvement in existing facilities, just an improvement to the campus, right? So that's okay, right?
It's more expansive.
When you think about building an entire new campus, that's sometimes, that's kind of thought of differently. And I can tell you that oftentimes that's one of those things that can be a little more of a challenging as a project for the reasons I discussed earlier, right? Is that wherever you plop that new facility, right, or that new campus, it's going to serve a certain portion of your district. It's not going to serve the other portion of the district. So naturally, the folks that aren't going to have anything to do with that particular location, that's not a project that's very enticing for them, right? That's why it's important that they have something out of this bond at the facilities that serve them.
Well, I'm just going to humorously point out that obviously the way you said that makes projects sound like something people want in their district, and I know my district does want, but I can also see where many times schools bring with them traffic and noise and other things that not in my backyard. So the mere angle that you presented that they're generally seen as favorable, I find fascinating, because I can also think of other experiences for other schools here in Pasadena, especially where there's some of the private schools that have gone through a lot regarding neighbor relations over improvements in some of their campuses. So I think it's an issue that can almost cut both ways depending on the community you're dealing with. But I always find your remarks informative and I appreciate them.
Well, and I was just going to say, as you were thinking, you were saying that right before you said cut both ways, that was what was going through my head, which is all of this depends on circumstances in the community itself, right? So in a lot of communities, if you're talking about building a new school or a new campus, they're going to see the value of that, right? But you may have some folks that are near that site that don't like the idea of building something big near their neighborhood, right? So, and that can happen in a lot of different communities. So there's a bit of a pull and a tug here, right? Or a push and a pull. Okay. So after the projects and programs section, we get to what we call the argument section of a poll. And the idea here is, if you as a board choose to place this bond on the November ballot, there's going to be an election cycle, right? And during that election cycle, there's going to be a lot of discussion and debate within the community about your proposal. And you're going to have some folks who will stand up and advocate on behalf of this proposal. They're going to say, here's why we need it, and this is why you should vote yes. You might also have some opponents who say nasty things about the bond and you as a district and say we shouldn't have this thing, right? So for this to be a reliable gauge of the feasibility of a bond measure, we need to simulate that type of discussion and debate in the space of the poll so that we have an understanding of not only where your voters are at on the natural, which was that initial ballot test, but what happens to their support for your proposal once they've been exposed to that type of discussion and debate that they're undoubtedly going to encounter moving toward Election Day. And so we do that by testing both positive and negative arguments. Shown here on this slide are the positive arguments. The nature of the question is, supporters of this measure say blank, you insert a positive argument. Do you think this is a very convincing, somewhat convincing, or not at all convincing reason to support the measure? And what you see here is that a lot of the positive arguments resonate with your voters. All but one of them had 2/3 or more of your voters say that that's at least a somewhat convincing reason to support the measure. When you get to sort of the overall ranking, though, and you go to the top, what you find is the messages that really seem to resonate with voters have to do with sort of providing and sustaining and enhancing affordable access to higher education, right? So Pasadena City College ensures that lower and middle income students who can't afford university still have the opportunity to succeed in college and careers, right? That's your number one, right? Number two, the fact that you as an institution are a vital resource for the community. You educate the nurses and healthcare professionals that take care of people, the police and firefighters that protect them, as well as the first responders, and also the workers who fuel the economy. So it's kind of helping paint the picture of the role you play in the community and in the economy. And then the third one there has to do with, everybody understands how expensive both the UC system and the state system have gotten, and that by having, Pasadena City College here locally, it provides, students the opportunity to start here at a community college and then affordably, move on to the state and UC system. So lots of good positive arguments that get traction. So at this point, voters have now heard more about this proposal than they did initially, right? We got to talk about the tax rates. That's the wet blanket, right, that we threw on them. But then we had a chance to come back and talk about the various projects you could fund with this bond, as well as expose them to positive arguments about the measure. And so we circle back with what we call the interim ballot test. We present that 75-word ballot statement to them again and ask them, now that you've heard a bit more, where do you stand? You can see on the big bond, the one on the left, it's hanging pretty steady, right? We're at 62% still. To the right, what you see is we've ticked up slightly. We're at 66% support. So you're starting to see a bit of a gap open up between those two versions. And then you get to the negative arguments. And the idea behind the negative arguments is we want to pressure test voter support for this proposal by exposing them to the types of opposition arguments they'll likely encounter during the election cycle, right? You'll notice we test a shorter list of negatives than we do positives. That is for good reason. What you tend to find when you get into these types of bond election cycles is that the proponents of a measure, right, they're larger in number, better organized, they raise more money, and they've got a louder voice, right? So then when you compare to the opponents. And so we simulate that disparity by testing smaller number of negatives than we do positives. But the negative arguments we're testing are designed to be hard-hitting negative arguments. I am trying as a survey expert to see how much I can erode support for your proposal based on the kind of negatives that they could encounter in an election cycle. And so you see here that some of the negatives get traction, the number one being just this isn't a good time, right? With the pandemic and inflation, many people are struggling to stay afloat. Now's not a time to be raising taxes, right? The second one there was just the idea that it's already really expensive to live in Pasadena, and this measure is just going to make it more expensive, right? So we're testing some hard negatives. The real question is what happens afterwards. And that's the final ballot test. So we circle back one more time, present that same 75-word ballot statement, and what you find is the negative arguments do cool us down, as they always do. For the big bond, we drop about 4 points. And so at this point, we're sitting at 58% support on the big bond. But the bond to the right, the more modest bond, that didn't erode as much, and we're sitting at 64%. So both of these are still above that 55% threshold you are required to have for a Prop 39 bond to be successful, one by 3 points, and then one by 9 points, right? Also, by the way, again, back to that poll we did back in 2020, the final ballot test was right on the bubble at 55%. So what we're seeing is stronger numbers now than when we were doing the same exercise 2 years ago. Okay, so what does all this mean? I got a couple wrap-up slides here. I'm going to first circle back to that question I mentioned at the outset as sort of the overarching question, the first one we're trying to answer, which is it feasible? Meaning if you as a board were to choose to put this measure on the November ballot, does it have a reasonable chance of success? I think the answer to that question is yes. Many of the things that we want to see in place for a measure to have a good chance of success on election day, we see here. We saw that first and foremost that that education item that we tested on the importance of issues was right up there near the top of the list, sharing it only with addressing homelessness as the most important issue facing the community, and had a solid gap in the perceived importance between that item and the issue of preventing local tax increases. That translated into solid natural support for a bond. Depending on which version we tested, it was either 62% or 65% support. That's about 7 points and 10 points above that 55% threshold that's needed, respectively. All the projects we tested were positive. We had positive arguments that really got traction with voters. And importantly, at each point that we came back to voters in the space of the poll and said, now that you've heard more about this proposal, where do you stand? All those ballot tests were above the 55% threshold needed for passage, and that's even after testing the negatives, right? So those, when we see that type of pattern in place, that tells us, okay, you've got a reasonable chance of success should you move forward with a bond measure for November. Now, that said, I think a couple of observations, recommendations, and the first one is it's really important to keep in mind that a poll like this is a snapshot in time, right? It is not a crystal ball looking forward to November and saying you're going to get 62% or 65% on election day. It's a snapshot in time of where your voters are today, and we have an idea of how they're likely to react to the types of information they can encounter in an election cycle. But at the end of this process, what happens on election day isn't determined by what your poll says today. It's determined by everything that happens from this point forward, right? And I mention that because it's a reminder that as promising as these results are, we've got to make smart decisions about how you structure this measure in a way that it's consistent with the type of measure your voters are willing to support, and you got to put the work in, right, to educate and inform. And so let me pause for a second.
So in this regard, then, do you look at a general election cycle differently than a primary election cycle? So would the voters that you've been sampling, would they vote differently if this was a primary June election versus a November general election?
Yeah, so we can look at what we call what you have is this larger November electorate. Nested within that is a smaller June electorate, right? So if you're a June voter, you are also a November voter. You're going to show up in the general, but not all November voters are June voters. And so we can look at those differences in propensity. All of our recommendations here in our plan was looking at November, not June, right? We tend to find that all other things being equal, the higher the turnout, the better the support tends to be for these types of measures.
Great, thank you.
So with the idea of making smart decisions, I have a couple comments on that. Price tag. This is, again, one of those really important questions that you're going to agonize over and hand-wring over when you're putting together your bond proposal. It's important that you keep it in voters' comfort zone. As we saw in the polling, we tested that Prop 39 max of $25 tax rate that rolls up to a $698 million bond. And we also test that more modest 565, 2 cent per $100,000 AV rate. We saw that there was more sensitivity on that big bond compared to the more modest bond. And so my recommendation is stay away from the max, go for something that's backed off, that's more like the 565 and the 2 cent rate. In terms of project priorities, we saw that although just about everything that you could consider funding with this bond, voters saw merit in, the priorities from their perspective were fixing your aging facilities, right? Instructional technology, STEM-related facilities, modernizing your career training facilities and equipment, removing any hazardous materials. So, old buildings, sometimes you encounter asbestos, lead pipes, that sort of stuff. Voters want to see those gone. And obviously ADA compliance. Now, in terms of putting the work in, this is an important first step in going out and talking to your voters, right? But it's really the first step, right, in what is a longer process that Charles will talk a little bit more about. But it's important that if you want to sort of plan for a November bond, you got to start to now expand the conversation with the community, right? And Charles will have more to say about with that. And then finally, you as a public agency are allowed to educate and inform. You're not allowed to advocate, right? It nevertheless will be important to have an independent campaign pop up at the right time to carry this message through the election cycle when you as a public agency really sort of need to step back, right? And that independent campaign can step up and they can go out and talk to voters and not only talk about what this bond will accomplish, but trying to give them persuasive messages to help them feel comfortable voting yes. That independent campaign is also important because, we live in very uncertain times, right? You've got a lot of sort of moving parts out there, and the ground shifts between their feet, and the weather changes, and things like pandemic and the inflation, and some of these other political issues that can pop up during election cycle. It's important that there's a voice out there during that last 88 days of the election that can speak on behalf of this proposal. When, again, as a public agency, your hands are a little more tied. Yes, ma'am.
So what kind of experience do you see with districts that come back to voters maybe 5 to 10 years later asking for money again?
It really depends community to community. We've worked in some communities where they're on their 4th bond cycle in a very short amount of time. Some districts have really taken that approach of we're going to do smaller bonds more frequently than big bonds less frequently. And then I've worked in some communities that they haven't had a bond in 20 years, and it's like pulling teeth trying to, have their voters step up and decide that this is something they want to invest in. So it is every community is different scenario that we want to look at.
Can you tell what kind of community we live in?
Well, first of all, you have passed a bond, but it's been a while, right? Your local high school district recently passed a bond, right? And based on these polls, and your voters aren't in a vacuum. They understand these things are going on. And a lot of times your voters are people like Pasadena, so they stay here, right? So you've got a lot of sort of institutional knowledge in the community because folks, it's not as transient a community as you get in some other communities. And so all of that is baked into the results we saw here. And what we see is that if you put together a proposal that aligns with your voters' priorities, you keep it affordable, right? And you do a good job informing them about the choice you're asking them to make, and there's an independent campaign that's going to go out and do a lot of engagement and outreach, I think you're well positioned to be successful.
Tim, can I add briefly to that
Please.
answer? Sorry, I'm going to jump in and tag team here quickly. We did test a negative in the poll that was exactly along those lines. So one of the negatives presented was the college passed a $150 million bond in 2002. Most local school districts passed similar bonds in recent years. Property owners will be paying the debt off for another 30 years. So sort of cast as an opponent might frame that issue, that was the second to the lowest in terms of convincing negative arguments. And even in the face of that argument, support at the end was 58 to 64%. So I don't see that as being an impediment to passing a bond here.
What about comparing us to other community college districts? For example, Mount Sac passed a $1 billion bond several years ago. And if we look at our neighboring community college districts, what's your experience in analyzing what they've done?
Yeah, I mean, by comparison, your $150 million from 2002 is a small bond compared to what you see on the ballot these days. The last bond we did for Glendale Community College was over $300 million. The last Pasadena Unified School District measure I know was also, I think, almost $500 million. So there's some big bonds out there. So, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, looking at $500 to $600 million bonds would have sort of gotten people's attention. But now that these bond dollars are pretty big, I don't think that you're likely to see much sticker shock based on the size of bond you're looking at here.
But one thing I'd add to that, though, is what we've tried those types of messages in a lot of communities, like look what our neighbors have done, therefore we need to do it. And we have found that those messages kind of fall flat, right? What voters want to know is what's the need here, right? And you need to be able to articulate that to them, and what's the benefit of this proposal. They're going to be much more open and interested in that conversation than they are that, the neighbors, trying to keep up with the Joneses in another district.
And that's my comment, is that if the need here is, let's say, $800 million need, and we're looking at, what's comfortable, which is 565, then are we shortchanging ourselves because we're going for that comfort versus what we need?
I would kind of look at it the other way, which is you have a need that's larger than what you can fund with this particular bond that your voters have said that they're willing to support. But, and I get that, right? This is not going to be the silver bullet that solves all your problems. The reality is most districts are in that same position. Their need exceeds what they can possibly get, either legally, like you can't go for a bond above a $25 tax rate, for example. That's a Prop 39, or more importantly, politically, right? It's important you listen to your voters, and if they say, we're comfortable with this level right here, that's where you should be gauging your bond, right? To go beyond that is to, create a much higher risk that on election day you come home with zero, right? As opposed to some, this big bond that you've gone for.
Right, thank you.
We had a saying I've always heard that puts it pretty well, that pigs get fat and hogs get slaughtered. So.
Yeah. Any other questions related to the polling? If not, what I'm going to do is hand off to Charles. He's got a couple more slides. Yes, sir.
Have you ever conducted polls like this where you get results in a certain range and then the reality comes out to be more negative? And whether it still passes or not, but not by as much. And if that has ever happened, what did you see caused that to happen?
Sure, that's a great question. So the short answer is yes. The longer answer is if you go back to 2016, there have been 6 major election cycles, right, since then. There's the primaries and the generals in 16, 18, and 20. In 5 of those 6 election cycles, our track record is 100%, meaning those measures that we recommend to go to ballot based on our polling 100% have been successful. The exception to that is March 2020, right? March 2020, if you paid attention, to sort of the outcomes around the state, was a horrible election cycle for bonds and tax measures. Education-related bonds, which normally pass at a rate statewide of about 82%, they passed at 37%. It was the very first time in 25 years that voters rejected a statewide bond for education. And so it was a very tough election. The why question, we did a ton of, there's some obvious things, but we did a ton of sort of post-hoc analysis looking at this, looking at the tracking polls. And it really comes down to the two major things. Number one, the obvious one, is COVID, right? About 2 weeks before the March election, COVID hit the United States, and it freaked everybody out, right? Understandably. Here we are with half the room, or most of the room in mask still, 3 years later. There was a lot of fear and uncertainty at that point about what does this mean on a public health front? What does this mean for the economy? They're talking about worldwide recessions and worldwide pandemics. And, to some degree, we experience both, right? And so that was an obvious factor that really just sort of pulled the rug out from under, voters' willingness to support a tax measure, because a tax measure is really an investment in your future. And at that point, the future didn't look very good, right? And so there was that concern. The bigger concern, actually, or one of the other factors that sometimes gets overlooked, is most of the polling for March elections happened in late summer, early fall of 19, right? Because you need to poll and give yourself some time to react and build your resolutions and everything. Well, after that polling was conducted, if you might recall, that was the first time that Donald Trump was impeached. And we had 4 months of open partisan warfare on a daily basis in the national news, right? And what that did was really sort of light a fire under people's partisanship. And so when we talk about these local measures, what we sort of rely on is there's a certain percentage of voters who maybe, even though they're Republicans, right, they set their partisanship aside, and they're looking at, same Democrats, they set their partisanship aside, they look at the merits of this local proposal, right? Well, in March, nobody was interested in setting their partisanship aside, right? They were beating the tribal drumbeat of you're going to be a loyal Republican or loyal Democrat. And what we saw in the polling was that the moment that happened, you started watching a lot of Republican voters sort of back away from any of these local measures. And so that's another reason why leading up to March, it was looking a little shaky, and then COVID hit. And you had a lot of measures that, were polling 58% or so that on election day came in at 53, right? And that's the difference. But again, highly unusual circumstances in both scenarios that sort of combined for this perfect storm that made March a bad election cycle. The good news was November came back around, November 2020. Bond passage rates went back to their historical averages. We wound up being 100% in November, and so the world sort of righted itself a little bit.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, let me hand it over to Charles. He's got a couple more slides.
Thank you, Tim. So I'm Charles Heath. I'm a partner with TBWH Props and Measures. I'm the strategy and communications consultant, so my job is to sort of pick up where Tim leaves off and take the findings from his opinion research and put that into action to help you develop a bond measure for the ballot, and also implement communication strategies to make sure that the public is aware of your needs and your proposal should you choose to pursue an election. So I thought I'd start just by talking kind of big picture about the process, and then we'll narrow in a little more specifically on next steps, where we would go next. As we've discussed, what we've done to date is our feasibility study. So largely based on the opinion research and kind of an assessment of the political environment of 2022. As Tim has summarized, we're seeing all of the criteria in place that we look for the underpinnings for a successful bond measure. From here, if you do want to pursue a November 2022 measure, our next steps would be to, one, start the process of building broad consensus around this proposal, right? We surveyed 800 some voters. We need to get the message out much broader than that. That typically starts by building some consensus within your internal constituencies, students, student families, faculty, staff, kind of within the college family, so to speak. Make sure they understand what this proposal is about, what your facility needs are, and what a bond measure would potentially deliver. and then fan out more broadly into the communities that comprise your district to make sure that those folks that may not have as direct a connection with your college understand the value that you deliver to the community more generally, but also what your facility needs are and why these investments are needed. And along those lines, as we're talking to some specific communities, I think that's where we can get in more specifically to the issues around satellite campuses and new construction. One of the things that really stood out to me in Tim's research is that these ballot measures tend to win or lose on the big theme, right? It has less to do with the details. Voters are being asked to consider, a couple dozen measures on most general election ballots. They're not going to get into the nuances, and so they're kind of looking at what's the thematic purpose of this measure. And what I see really showing through in your research here is that the idea of ensuring affordable access to college education is the theme that really drives this. And so if we can frame satellite campuses and new construction in that light, I think it'll be well received by your voters, which ultimately is what you're trying to achieve with those projects. So that type of educational outreach to make sure people are informed, they're aware of the underlying need and what you're doing to try to address this need. At the end of the day, the bond measure is a solution that you're promoting to a problem. They got to understand the underlying problem. So that consensus building and outreach activity is something that we would help guide you through. From there, we would look to take what we've learned both from the opinion research and also from what we've heard in the communities through that consensus building process to build the measure that would ultimately go to the ballot. Tim has provided some broad recommendations here around bond amount, tax rate, project priorities. That all needs to be refined and put into the actual language that would come back to you as a board in the form of a resolution, a project list, the actual ballot question that you would put before voters, the documents that voters in the community would scrutinize as they consider their vote. And that process culminates with us bringing that resolution to you, the board, to consider. And if you adopt that, that places the measure on the ballot. And we'll talk about the deadlines associated with that in a minute. If you take that step and you place the measure on the ballot, there's a fundamental shift in the process then, right? So while the district, the college district, can educate and inform the public and plan and prepare a measure for the ballot, what you can't do is advocate for the passage of the measure. So this last step, step number 4 outlined in green there, is the advocacy campaign, as Tim recommended. Typically for these measures to achieve the supermajority levels of support required for passage, you need that last advocacy push. So what that means is establishing an independent campaign group separate from the college district, not using any college resources, private fundraising, getting students and faculty and staff and others that care about this issue to get involved in that campaign, to mount an advocacy campaign that you as elected members of the board are all familiar with. But that's sort of what takes us from where we are today to ultimately an election. Hopefully we achieve 55% vote and you can issue bonds and get to work on your projects. But kind of dialing in a little more narrowly on where we would go next, we've learned a lot from this polling about the themes and project priorities that resonate with your voters. My job would be to take that and develop a communication plan for getting that message out to the various constituencies that you serve, looking at how that might vary from community to community based on projects in those specific areas and what we've learned from the polling about what they value. That's sort of the broad-based communication strategy to reach voters generally. Typically, there's also a more targeted stakeholder outreach process. I've worked in a number of your K-12 feeder school districts, so making sure that city leaders, school district leaders, school board leaders, superintendents, teachers, others in those communities understand what this is about. So when they're asked in their community, what do you think about that Pasadena college bond measure, they have good answers to those questions. We would then work with you to implement the mass communication strategies to get that message out, work with your legal counsel and your financial advisors to develop the actual proposal that would come back to you. And if we want to be on that November 2022 ballot, we're going to be working against an August 12th deadline to put this measure on the ballot. Tim described earlier some of the changes we saw in 2020 as the world evolved on us and some unusual factors emerged. One thing I would recommend that we do as we get closer to that deadline is potentially conduct some updated opinion research, especially if there's any significant changes in the economic landscape or with the pandemic. That way we'll have up-to-date information to bring back to you to make a final recommendation as to whether we pull that trigger to go to the ballot. If you do so, then we transition to the advocacy campaign for those final months, September, October, November of 2022, and that's where that independent group would step forward to be the lead voice as Election Day approaches. So that's sort of what we have in store if you want to pursue a bond, and happy to answer any questions you have.
I have a question on, I heard you say supermajority and 55%. So for this bond to pass, what supermajority, would that be 2/3?
No, it's 55%.
55%,
but
okay.
greater than 50.
So on one of your slides, you talk about, for doing the next steps, that we'll do broader outreach to the community. So I know in the past, there was a lot more, I think, deeper conversations with our communities. The last time, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, we were kind of testing out with the communities. It seemed pretty light to me. So how are you planning on doing this larger, more expansive outreach?
It comes in many forms. So again, sort of if we look at internal outreach to sort of the campus community, then that tends to be engaging with groups like the student leadership, faculty association, groups like that to get the message out through those existing organizations. More broadly, if we're talking about voters out there in the community, we're using direct mail, we're using social media, we're using targeted digital advertising to get the message out, because you're talking to hundreds of thousands of voters. And again, we can educate and inform, we can't advocate, but we can use those communication tools to reach those folks. So it's usually sort of those mass communication strategies paired with some targeted outreach to opinion leaders in those communities, which is how we tend to get the message out.
Any other questions? Well, it seems like we want to thank you for a great presentation, and I guess the board we have our work cut out for us. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Okay. So next on our agenda is the combined consent calendar. Approve consent calendar items E1 through G17.
Motion to approve. And I'll second that with a comment.
Please.
When I was a city councilman, I used to get very excited about building things. I love bringing Home Depot in and markets for the community. And I was looking at this agenda, and as I was looking at it, I wrote our president a note. There's a lot of stuff that the public doesn't really look at these agendas. But when you look at this, the business agenda today, we're doing so much. The aquatic center, the control system for the main gates, the outdoor fitness center, the U building, the K through 12 workforce that just goes on. And I'm very impressed and excited, as I was years ago. And
Thank you.
It shows to the public that we're really moving in a good direction. I think the campus community, the students should be very happy because this is for them. And so I'm very happy with the board and what we're doing. So thank you.
Okay. So do we have a motion already or what?
Appreciate it.
Okay.
Yeah, we have a second.
So all in favor? Okay. Unanimous vote. Thank you. Thank you for your comment. Okay, so now we will go to personnel. Trustee does not vote. Do we have a motion to approve the personnel calendar?
Motion to approve.
Okay, any questions, thoughts? If not, we'll take a vote. All in favor? Thank you. Oh, what you looking at? Okay, so wonderful. We go to action items at this time. Okay, the first action item is receipt of the fiscal year 2021 foundation audit. Do we have any discussion or any question on that?
So I'd like to suggest, if it pleases the board, that you could lump together items I1 through 7, and then 14 through 17, and do a vote, and leave 8 through 13 as a separate one, because the student trustee doesn't vote on MOUs. I don't know if you want to do this individually, but you could group them together if you so choose.
I like that
Such
idea.
wonderful thought,
I'll make a
Miss
motion to approve
Madam
1 through 7.
President.
Madam
Okay.
Chair, I'll make a motion to approve 1 through 7.
1 through 7,
Second.
do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, trustee. Okay,
President
all in
Brown,
favor?
I would like to pull 3 item I3 for further discussion. Just doing.
Item 3?
Okay.
Okay, that's fine. So we will have to redo our motion.
Amend the motion.
Amend the motion, go ahead.
Fine.
Okay, so
somebody-
we'll,
A second agree that we will pull item 3.
A second. Okay.
okay, so all in favor? Okay, so we'll approve all except for item 3. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so all in favor? Did I see the hands?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now, trustee Wall, item 3.
Yeah, so I did ask this question, not so much to know whether or not we were, so you may have seen the comments, it was not so much to know whether or not we were in line with other neighboring colleges. My question was really whether or not increasing the non-resident tuition fee at this time would, may in some way harm our enrollment issues. And this issue came to me, I think, as I was discussing with some of the other colleges when I was up in Sacramento. And so they talked about how the need to, or their own goal to increase their both out-of-state and international student presence, they're becoming more competitive and looking at the structure of their tuition. So I just wanted to bring that up and see whether or not we have looked at that and what that impact would be.
Well, we have Hedva, do you want to come up and talk about how, or Dr. Olivo, would somebody like to come up and talk about how we arrived at this recommendation? Because we did look at all of the neighboring, we did look at our neighbors. So,
when we did a poll for the, I'm so short. When we did a poll for the neighboring areas around here, most of them, we are very in line. We're using what's called the state average. And I think Dr. Oliva can speak better to whether it would affect enrollment. I think what affected enrollment was COVID and not being here as opposed to the rates. But that's just, I don't have anything to support that.
Yeah, I will say that we did check with our professionals in the international student services area, and there were no hesitations about adopting these fees.
Okay, so everyone else is pretty much in line, and we're not in competition then, and in danger of losing enrollment?
No.
Okay, thank you.
So will you make a motion?
I will make a motion to
David has
approve
a-
item I3.
oh,
David
David
has a
has
question.
I'm sorry, I didn't see you, David.
I just wanted to ask, because I know that you said that we're aligned with the state average. Is this higher or lower than the state average?
The state average is exactly the state average. The state chancellor's office computes the state average, and then that's what we pick, or the consensus is with all the neighboring community colleges use that to be consistent.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, trustee Wall?
I didn't understand the answer to that, though. So I think trustee Ramirez asked, are we higher or lower than the state average?
We
Not
are
what
the state average.
We are at the state average, okay.
Right,
all right.
that's what Hedva said, we are the state average.
Thank you.
May we have a motion?
I move to approve.
Second, number 3.
Okay, all in favor? Thank you. All right.
Okay.
Okay, so now we will go to
Now you could.
8.
Yes.
Is it 7 or 8? 7?
Would be 8 through 13.
Okay, so do we have a motion to approve?
Move to approve 8 through 13.
Second.
Okay, all in favor to adopt? Thank you. Okay. Okay, so now we will go to,
14 through 17.
okay, so before we go to, I would like us to talk about Board Bylaw 2310.
Okay.
I kind of noticed an error. I'm sorry I didn't see it earlier. What I noticed was that our according to what I read, we start at 5, whereas we start at 4.
Well, no, our closed session is at 4. That references the time that the general business meeting starts, which is at 5.
Okay, so that was one. kind of strange. I didn't, okay, so the other.
We could word it
I
differently.
would think 4 o'clock is when we gather. And we do call our
Can we
meeting
move
to
it
order
to
at 4.
We do have it at 4, right?
Yeah, that's what I thought. So I'm not sure why we have it at 5.
Yeah,
So we
so
open.
technically speaking, we have we open a regular session.
At 4.
And then we
Right, then we go
at
to
4, and then we
closed.
immediately adjourn. So it would be
True.
okay to change this to 4.
What if we changed our meeting to 5?
Never.
Well, that was,
That's not going to
That's
happen,
a different
honey.
question.
Crystal, do you have any comment on this? Because this came through the committee, so I want to make sure
Okay.
that I said it correctly, and maybe I misunderstood.
Well, not all boards have their closed session at the beginning of the meeting, so we try to publicize when the regular meeting is going to happen. That's why it says 5. So if the public was looking at this, they'd know that the regular meeting of the board starts at 5 on Wednesdays. But you can do whatever you want.
Oh, no, it just came to my attention. I have to report at 4, so that's what I thought, but that's okay. If the board believes 5 o'clock is fine, then it's fine. Then the other part.
I think Trustee Chenlau. has
Chenlau?
something to-
No, I agree with your point because at 4, that's when some of the folks from the public come and make public comments. So if we post the meeting and say it's at 5, how would they know to come at 4 to make public comments?
I'll propose a very small wording change that could hopefully resolve the confusion, and that is we would state that it would start at 4 and then go on to explain that we open with a regular session, then immediately adjourn to a closed session, and the open session starts at 5. That's more wording, but then that would make it clear to the public.
Okay, so I'm not proposing that we change, it's just something that I thought. And as we go down a little later, there was an emergency that talk about 2024. Why is that 2024? I didn't understand that.
Yeah, prior to January.
What,
So it's the meetings during proclaimed states of emergency prior to January 1, 2024. So I think that is an error.
That
No?
That means this would extend until then, and then we would have to renew this, or it would
Oh, I see.
expire on its own
Oh, is that what that
way.
is?
Okay.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Yes, that's the language in the law.
Okay. Trustee Martin?
So my suggestion to resolve the 5 o'clock issue would be not to state any time, but to make the policy state at a time to be posted, and I'm not sure exact how many hours the law requires it's posted.
It's 72 hours, so we always post 72 hours.
So at
ahead
a
of-
time that will be posted 72 hours prior to the meeting. And then we don't feel obligated or misleading the public as to what time any given meeting occurs, and have the flexibility to change.
Yeah, I would concur with Trustee Martin.
Yeah, I would concur. Sometimes we know we're going to have a longer closed session. And we can-
Very good. So everybody agree with that? I am. I'm satisfied with that.
So do you want me to make a
I'm just
motion?
wondering. Well, no, I'm
Ended
sorry.
motion, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm just wondering if 72 hours is, I mean, I know legally that's our notice, but with someone who's scheduling when they want to come and speak, looking at something 3 days ahead may not be enough time. So while I understand the flexibility that we have for the board, I'm thinking from the public, you know, if I want to speak at a board meeting and I don't know when that meeting is going to be until only 72 hours before, that may be a little bit burdensome.
Okay, we're creating policies here, and I would suggest that we do publish a calendar.
Right. that's
Calendar
right.
We have a
occasionally
calendar.
changes, but we have a calendar so folks can figure out when we're scheduled to meet. This is a policy,
Committee.
and I concur
bylaw.
with Trustee Martin that we don't specify the exact start time, but that it's specified in the proper advance notice.
Okay, that's
Okay.
fine. Thank you.
Okay, so our approval now would go, that was the only observation I
So
had.
you need to have a motion
I thought we had a
to
motion.
make that change. Well, because you're actually,
So the maker of the motion can accept the amendment. So
Okay.
who was the maker of the motion?
Trustee Martin.
Do you want to propose an amendment to
I'd
this
be
board
thrilled
policy?
to propose an amendment that the time stated in the policy be changed to reflect at a time subject to the 72-hour posting
Do we have a
required
second?
by state law.
Right, and
We
then
have-
whoever seconded it
I
could.
second that.
Okay, so all in favor? Thank you. Okay, so now we can go ahead and approve the other ones, unless there's any comments or questions. We have Board Policy 4040, 4230, and 4300. Is there a motion?
Motion to approve?
Is there a second? Second. Okay, all in favor?
Wait, I have a question on, are we approving all four together?
no, it's the three, because you already approved the first one as amended.
We're approving all the board policies together, right?
Okay, we first approve 2310 with amendment, which was made by Trustee Martin, and now we are approving the other three.
Okay, I'd like to make a comment on board policy 4230 on grade appeal.
Sure.
I appreciated the addition of the word equity onto this policy, and what we've heard in the policy meeting was now that students can now have an advocate with them when they want to attest a grade appeal. And so I think this is a really good offering that we have to students who may not feel comfortable just going to have a grade appeal on their own, but to have someone with them is going to, I think, help the students, with their grade appeal. So I appreciated that. Thank you.
So do you make a motion?
Yes, to approve.
Okay.
And your motion is to approve the next three, 15, 16, and 17, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay,
I'll second that motion so we can
And
move
all
on.
in favor? It's just Linda. Okay. Okay, I think we have gone through our policies. Now we'll go to our information items. Madam President?
Okay, great. Well, I'm very glad to be back here with all of you in person. Happy New Year, since we didn't get to see you in person otherwise. Spring semester is rolling along. As we've reported, we have our COVID-19 safety measures firmly in place, testing, mandatory masking, our vaccine program, and thank you for approving our vaccine booster requirement for all of our employees tonight. This month, another series of COVID-19 related payments were made to our students. All told, we have awarded more than $10 million to 13,691 students according to financial need. Many thanks go to Dr. Olivo in Student Services and David Hull, our Financial Aid Director, for making this possible for our students. Tomorrow, I am actually going to be driving up to Monterey to the Asilomar Women's Leadership Conference. I'm going to be doing a panel and poetry activity with Dr. Helen Benjamin and with Tamil Gilkerson, who is president of Evergreen Valley College. And we're going to be doing a really interesting opportunity for the women leaders who are there learning from other women leaders about grounding themselves in their own background. And then on Friday, I'll be participating in some mock interviewing with the participants. So looking forward to it. It's hard to believe, but yes, 20 years ago, this week was my turn at Asilomar Women's Leadership. So time flies when you're having fun. Yesterday, we received word that Janet Tang, a student in natural sciences, has been selected by the Council on Undergraduate Research to present at this year's Posters on the Hill event. Janet's research project is entitled Real-Time Atomic Scale Mapping of the Relationship Between Surface Chemistry and Crystallography to Understand Corrosion. I did not write that, and I could not write that. Janet will also be interning at Caltech this summer through the WAVES program, which targets students from traditionally minoritized groups. And we need to also stop using the word target because that's a militaristic term. We want to say focuses on students from traditionally minoritized groups. And last year, she was the first community college student to win a major competition sponsored by National Lab. So congratulations, Janet. Many of our spring athletes are back in action after a lengthy time away. The Lancers baseball team is off to a 4-1 start, and our track and field also started their season earlier this month at Mount Sac, and our basketball teams are in action. Basketball is one of those interesting sports which starts in the fall, ends in the spring. So it's technically a fall sport, but we're in spring. Next Wednesday, February 23rd, our Division of Institutional Equity, Diversity, and Justice welcomes author and advocate Linda Sarsour for a Zoom lecture and discussion, Higher Education's Urgent Imperative to Become an Anti-Racist. And I think our own Dr. Bolin mentioned this earlier tonight, but I just wanted to emphasize it as well. So with that, that concludes my report.
Thank you, Dr. Andy Jonas. Now we'll turn to announcement by Share Governance representatives, and let's begin with Academic Senate. Is there
Armia?
someone? Come on up, girl. That doesn't look like Gina Lopez.
Nope, that is Armia.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Is this the right place or here?
That's good.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, thank you all for having me here. Pleasure to meet you. I'm Armia Walker, and I'm acting as the Academic Senate Secretary. And we don't have a whole lot to share out. It's been an exciting month, to say the least. And we are working on a few new hiring committees, as well as upcoming elections for our particular seats are coming up. So we've been talking about that as well. Just like everyone else, adjusting to how to handle coming back and dealing with how to come back and operate as safe as possible. Trying very hard to stick to our 10+1 duties. And so that's in a nutshell. That's all I have for now. If there's any questions, I'll take any, but that's our report so far.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Armina. Classified Senate?
Hi, good evening. The Classified Senate is happy to announce that we're having the statewide Staff Employee of the Year Awards. They're now open, and the Senate is working to get classified colleagues recognized and are excited to put a name forward at our next board meeting in March. We also have 2 classified staff members who have left the college that we would like to recognize. The first being Graciela Carangella, who worked in human resources for the last 13 years and was actively involved in representing the Classified Senate, not only within our college, but also throughout the state, presenting the work she led during her time as president. In addition, we'd like to recognize Cha Mancini, who has retired after 29 years of service to the college. She was also a strong advocate of classified staff and led the Staff Development Committee for 11 years. She was also an active member of the Social Activities Group for a decade, leading some of the most memorable experiences, including Rose Parade planning. Also, the Classified Senate would like to welcome 3 new classified employees. We have Ying Ji, who will be working in Student Support Program, PASS. Grace Rakow, who is working in Economic and Workforce Development, as well as Christina Serrano, who will be in Human Resources. And finally, on behalf of the Classified Senate, we would just like to continue to recognize all of our classified employees and commend them for their resiliency and dedication during these ever-changing times. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Management Association? Oh, there she is.
Here's Rebecca.
Good evening.
Nice to be here. I just want to really recognize PCC's managers and leadership team for really stepping up and in the first week of school. In addition to all of our regular duties that are chaotic the first week, managers and the leadership team collectively stepped up and in to staff wet huts and assist with COVID testing support. And it was a long week, couple weeks, I don't know. Each day felt like a week in and of itself. So I really want to recognize leadership team and managers in particular for that. A number of managers will be attending the ACA conference next week, as we're approving money left and right for folks to go. And I want to shout out to Stephanie Fleming, who, as Isela has left, has taken on oversight of our success centers on campus. On top of, she's got like 6 jobs in one. I want to welcome Thea Alvarez as the new Dean of Social Sciences. Alvarado, sorry, my apologies. The new Dean of Social Sciences Division, and Francisco Suarez, the Dean of Non-Credit and Adult Ed. And I do want to just give a shout out to Darlene, Campus Police, Darlene Inda, her staff, Campus Police, Rich Larrett, who really mobilized before we opened, and just to get us everything we needed on campus, and PPE on campus, running around, her and Linda running around literally the Friday before to make sure every department had what they needed for us to open. And I think not enough recognition is given to those folks, and they did it without complaining, laughing, joking, and I really appreciate them and really want to give props and say thank you so much.
Thank you. Associated students? Emmanuel, you here?
Good evening. So we recently approved a budget for the Associate Students Student Equity Committee to present and celebrate Black History Month with the film Hidden Figures at Harbison Hall on Tuesday, February 22nd at 6:30 p.m. There will be hot dogs and sliders from Dog House provided. Also, ASPC today hosted a club rush on the main campus quad. That it was very beautiful to see so many students engaging with one another as they promoted some of their communities and hobbies. It was truly a welcoming space, full of excitement, and very uplifting to also see some college employees interacting with students. I want to thank Facilities and Campus Youth Department for their staff and hard work in helping us set up for the event. You know, as they usually do, thank you. That support doesn't go unnoticed from a student perspective. That's not all, though. We will be hosting a second day of Club Rush tomorrow, also from 12 to 1. So if y'all can please spread the word, and we'll see y'all there. We have also begun promoting a series of Associate Students Election Town Hall meetings where we aim to inform students about the process, positions available, and share experiences by former and current ASPC Executive Board members. The meeting will be virtual via Zoom beginning tomorrow at 12 p.m. and Monday the 28th at 4 p.m. Please reach out to our Chief Justice, Natalia Hernandez, for any questions to be addressed. Our next Associate Students Executive Board meeting will be next week, Friday, February the 23rd at 12 p.m. And that will be on our main campus in G1. Our agenda is being finalized at the moment, but please find it on board docs, Lancer Life, and physically posted on all campuses by the end of this week. For anyone listening tonight, please share that info as well with students. ASPCC VP of External Affairs, Jonathan Apodaca, and myself, we recently met with Mayor Gordo to discuss some of the work we've been doing. PCC has been preparing to welcome him February 24th for his State of the City speech delivery. To highlight a few things that we discussed were the importance of mental health, resources for students, and creating a culture that eliminates the stigma of asking for help during a time of crisis. We spoke about our sustainability efforts in collaboration with the Greenways petition designed by the Pasadena Complete Streets Coalition. We emphasized on the importance of finding safe commuting routes and reducing carbon emissions on our paths to PCC. And I would like to end this report by sharing a huge concern that I have. As a man of color who has been historically underserved in my community of Dina, I cannot accept the fact that we have not done enough to uplift our black community in the city, as well as at Pasadena City College. I understand that we have been working at improving our institution and efforts to become an anti-racist setting and black welcoming space. I'm grateful that we do have some safe spaces for student support, such as the Black Student Success Center, but that's not enough. We need all premises to be safe. Black history is U.S. history, and I don't believe that a month of celebrations is enough. Changing our Zoom backgrounds to backgrounds labeled Black History Month at PCC is not enough. Placing our only Black Associated Students board member on a massive banner in front of the college is not enough. Redesigning our school's website by including images of Black students is not enough. In 2022, an apology from any faculty member using the N-word in front of Black students will not be enough. That only allows for anti-Blackness to be amplified and not solved. If someone who isn't Black is fearless enough to use the N-word on this campus, that just makes one assume that that term is natural to their vernacular. I ask that this institution put their money where their mouth is. A vision is irrelevant, especially when the future isn't promised. We need more Black people doing outreach, people who actually live the experience. Reminder, racism isn't only an American problem. The transatlantic slave trade was a worldwide issue, so these biases exist beyond white supremacy. Anti-Black biases continue to be defended, and I will not tolerate any student sharing with me the extreme uncomfortable traumas that are re-triggered in their learning environment. I will fulfill my duty and report these concerns to the college, especially when there's a conflict of interest. According to an article written on May 27, 2021 by Pete Williams, journalist for NBC, he quoted Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. No other word in the English language so powerfully or instantly calls to mind our country's long and brutal struggle to overcome racism and discrimination against African Americans. I believe that if traumas are re-triggered, learning spaces immediately become hostile. This isn't about cancel culture. This isn't social media. This is real life at 1570 East Colorado Boulevard in Pasadena, California. Rather than asking what's the context behind a word being used at PCC, ask how we can help the Black student heal and or feel safer than before. Let's keep collaborating to make this college that I love so much a more equitable success center for the community. Let's focus on supporting the 3% of Black students who risk their life daily commuting to campus with the fear of being pulled over by police. Earlier in the academic year, I assisted the outreach team at the Pasadena Black Expo. And I thought it was beautiful to have Lancaster High School students interested in enrolling at PCC. But their first question was, what Black resources does PCC offer, and do they provide housing? I would be disappointed to know if they arrived at PCC this upcoming academic year. Their experience would be no different than their present, which lacks support. Instead of asking me directly, how can we increase Black student enrollment in the district? Please advocate for rent control so that Pasadena's Black population doesn't continue to decrease past 8%. And maybe we will also prevent PCC Black student population from decreasing below 3%. Please dive into the embedded racism that exists at PCC. That's the most important issue to be addressed as we get ready to host an HBCU caravan on March 2nd from 10 to 2 p.m. Please mark it in your calendars, and I hope to see the Transfer Center's effort to be overwhelmingly supported. For those who do not know what an HBCU is, it's an abbreviation for Historically Black Colleges and Universities. For anyone up for re-election or campaigning within this county, I would like to provide some unsolicited advice. Earn the Black vote in the communities you aim to represent, but also keep your promise of equal representation throughout your term. If you're elected without the Black vote, I beg you, recognize your surroundings and ask yourself, am I doing enough to be inclusive of the underrepresented? And how can I improve? And that is all. Thank you for listening. Good night.
Okay. Student trustee?
Thank you. Great to see you all in person again. I just wanted to report that I attended the legislative conferences in Sacramento and Washington, D.C. the last 2 weeks and learned a lot about the direction that our system is taking in state and federal advocacy. A huge focus for students nationally is to continue to push for free community college, even though we were a bit disheartened to see President Biden announce that he won't be pushing for free community college in his Build Back Better agenda. Still, students across the nation on the Student Trustee Advisory Committee still feel that we should continue to put pressure on this and continue to advise the ACCT to advocate for this in the future. I also just wanted to give a huge shout out to Natalie Guzman and all the other student leaders involved in another successful club rush today. I saw so many students who have been waiting for the chance to get involved, so it was just great to see that energy back on campus again. So if anyone here is available to stop by tomorrow and support, yes, we'll be having our last day of Club Rush from 12 to 1 p.m. And finally, I just want to echo Emmanuel's remarks. Our commitment to anti-racism is unmet. We should have learned from 2020 about the systems we have in place that permit microaggressions against our students of color that disrupt their learning. We shouldn't have to hear from multiple students about faculty and staff using racial slurs. That is unacceptable, and I expect action. I expect that everyone at this college at least sees how concerning this is. And we have anti-racism embedded in our mission statement and goals. This is not an anti-racist institution until everyone is on the same page about what that means.
Thank you. Trustee Chinla?
Thank you. I'd like to thank all the folks who have written to the trustees, especially me, in the last few weeks. Many of the students, community members, and faculty shared their views and their narratives about returning on campus. And I just want to say publicly that I read every single of your emails and understand how difficult the situation was. And I'm glad to see that it's been somewhat resolved and that folks are enjoying their time on campus, at least some of the students, and that faculty, students, and staff are resilient in moving forward, and I hope that we can continue to work together to better PCC. Thank you.
Trustee Fellow.
Thank you. Just something happy. I was driving on the 60 freeway. It was in Irwindale, and there's a huge, one of those billboards, huge, of Jackie Robinson's picture. It just says under it, character. And I felt very proud. I'm a very big fan of Jackie Robinson and the whole family that we get to meet here. And it just shows that he's a great model for our students. And I just wish they would have put PCC on there. But it was just wonderful to see. Thank you.
Trustee Silver?
Sure. One night we'll have to go spray paint PCC.
Yeah, let's do that.
So I also was so privileged to attend and represent PCC at the conference in Sacramento for the California community colleges, as well as in Washington, D.C., along with Linda Waugh, Dr. Andrew Jonas, David Ramirez, our awesome student trustee, and then Jim was a presenter in Sacramento. Really, really great presentation that Dr. Andrew Jonas and Jim Osterling did. And I just feel like community colleges are finally having a moment in our country. With Dr. Biden being a community college professor, I think that has shown a spotlight on the value and the work that we do. And I feel that legislators are hearing this and good things are happening, which translates into dollars for our students, for our institution. And I think that we should continue to use our voice and advocate with our legislators so that we press for continued improvement in student support and for our institutions.
Thank you. Trustee Waugh?
Yes, I also want to echo the importance of attending the ACCT and the CCCT, the league's conferences. I think that the legislative advocacy that we are present for and are able to really speak to our students' needs and our college and our district's needs is really is important for us statewide, but really helps our district in particular show ourselves up in leadership, not just advocating for ourselves, but across the system. I also want to call out Trustee Ramirez, who is the Vice President of the ACCT Student Senate, and really well represented. Very diplomatic person, able to really reason with all of these voices. Anyway, really shows up great in leadership, and the whole the student senate, I think, got to take a picture with FLOTUS with Joe Biden, so that was really great. So during since I last saw you, I've had a chance to. I attended the New Taipei City International Student Outreach, which was well, it was actually convened by quite a few people. So I know Dr. Olivo was part of it, but Dr. Wei was really one of the major drivers. But we had a lot of our students, a lot of our staff. It was an outreach to 39 students from Taipei who had been thinking maybe they would come here to the U.S. and thinking about PCC, but really just an excellent presentation. And it was great to hear from the students what their impressions were. But our own staff, our own students just did a great job really reaching out. So thank you all. I also have had some conversations with the Dream Academy outreach from Botswana. It was referred to me by my South Pasadena superintendent, looking to see whether or not there's any possibility of our college, any outreach or any partnership. So I have talked to Dr. Jonas, Dr. Olivo, and also Director Olivia Liu. I know there's a lot of interest. I know Trustee Brown also reached out to the sister cities. Anyway, that's a possibility. I think the more global exposure that we can give to our own students, give them opportunities, helps our own students, as well as brings that enrichment of global presence in our own campus. And then once again, I just want to reiterate that the PAPI committee, the President's API Community Advisory, is hosting the symposium on March 19th and the 24th, so there are going to be 2 short sessions. They'll be virtual. We normally have over 200 parents and students all over the district, so I know Armina sent out the flyer, but if you need it again, we'd love to have you all reach out within your districts and encourage them all to come. This is a great way for our communities to learn about not just what it would take to come to PCC, but any college opportunities and how they might apply for resources to help their students, financial aid, and career pathways. And I had a chance to attend I had a chance to judge the San Marino High School Lions Speech Club, and just really fabulous students. And it's really ranged from freshmen to seniors ready to go, but really outstanding speech students. And tomorrow, our San Marino Rotary will be having our 4-way speech test. So if anyone is interested in hearing high school students talk about Rotary 4-way speech, I welcome you to come. And that's it.
Okay, great. Next is Trustee Martin.
No report.
Trustee Osterlin.
Thank you. As Trustee Chen Lao already pointed out, we received a lot of communication from our constituents, faculty, staff, students, and people in the community. And the issue was the reopening of the campus. And I too received the highest volume of email that I've received on any particular subject. Some of the communications were from people passionately asking us to reopen and get back to online teaching, and others, frankly, equally passionately asking that we continue online. So I knew whatever decision was made was going to be popular with some and unpopular with others, and that's unfortunate, but sometimes that's the way things go. I want to commend the students and the employees of PCC. One of the things that I learned as we figured out how to reopen safely, one of the things I learned is approximately 99% of our students and 99% of our employees are fully vaxxed against COVID. And I really commend those people, because I think that has a very strong bearing on the outcome. As I understand it, the positivity rate in our COVID testing, which we undertook immediately before we reopened the campus and then weekly thereafter, our positivity rate has dropped to below 1%. That's very low. It's lower than the county number. I'm pleased to see that the county number is also dropping rapidly. And as I commented at our prior meeting, we received a lot of money from the federal government for CARES, and a lot of it, and this was previously reported, went to direct student support for our most disadvantaged students, which I think is awesome. And then the institutional money, much of that went to improving our air handling systems, including having fans, air handling devices with HEPA filters, cleaning, disinfecting. Thank you, Richard Larrett, for what you've been doing to keep our facilities clean and safe. Plexiglass dividers, OWL cameras, so we can do hybrid when that's necessary. And as I previously said, I knew that any decision that would be made would be popular with some and unpopular with others. But I think the decision that we made, it was an important one, and I think our administration made the right decision. I've sat on the statewide DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion workforce, task force, for the past 1+ year. And one thing that I learned was our most negatively impacted students were our financially disadvantaged students. They were the most negatively impacted by the pivot to online. So anything that we can do to get everybody back on campus as safe as possible, I think is an important step for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we've done that, and so far there was some confusion, as I understand it, and everything didn't work perfectly. But when you make large pivots like we did, I think there's going to be some of that, and I appreciate everybody's patience and understanding of that. And I understand now the testing systems, et cetera, are operating with much shorter waits. So thank you to our administration. Thank you to the Faculty Association for the revised MOU that we just approved tonight. I know that it was difficult and challenging for both sides, but you stuck through it, and we've moved forward. So just wanted to comment on that, and that concludes my comments for tonight. Thank you.
Well, thank you. So I just have one comment. I received an email from Tamika Alexander sharing with me the great opportunity that our students, of Black African American students, has to have this HBUC caravan in person which would provide more opportunities for our students to firsthand get information and even enroll to transfer to HBUC. You know, a lot of our students do go to local universities, but a great number of them prefer to go away from parents and go to these HBUC. So I am just so excited to see that we were selected as a site where this caravan will take place, where our students will have more opportunities right here at PCC to get all the information they needed and to be transferred. Kudos to Tamika. She has been just stellar in all of her work, and I really appreciate having her looking out for our students overall. So I was pretty excited about that. So that's really what I wanted to share. So let's go to proposed future board business meeting dates. Any changes or anything?
Yes, the one change will be a special meeting next Wednesday at 11 o'clock.
Yeah, can I ask about that at 11 o'clock? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So I know we were trying to find a time, and I see on my calendar here that I have something from 10 to 11. I don't know if it works for everyone else to slide it to 11:30. If it doesn't, I know.
I'm good.
11:30?
That would give me
Okay.
a better shot.
Works for me.
Jim?
That works for me.
Okay.
It was for me too. So let's
Okay.
make it 11:30.
So it will be a special meeting on next Wednesday, February 23rd at 11:30. It will be in the President's Conference Room, and it is and it will have both a closed session as well as a general item for discussion.
Okay, great. Okay.
And I have that as Thursday the 24th, not the 23rd, just checking.
No, it's
No, it's
Wednesday, the
Wednesday.
23rd.
Pardon me. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Hey,
Glad I
Jim.
asked. 11:30. Thank
Okay.
you.
And proposed future agenda items, any? Go ahead.
So I may have mentioned this before, but I would like I'd like to get a report to see where we are on the credit for prior learning, credit by examination. I know that we are working on that, but if at some point we can get a report on it, I think that would be helpful. And I know this should apply for everyone, but of course, the veterans, I think, are particularly impacted. With the EEO plan coming up, I know there's always been some discussion about how involved the trustees should be. Normally, we get it when it's already gone through it's already almost baked, and we're just approving it before the Chancellor's office. We send it to the Chancellor's office. But I think, one of the things that we're discussing for the March town hall is how can the trustees be more engaged and involved in the EEO plan and understanding it, and what our own role is in making sure that we have policies that support it. So I just put it out to my fellow trustees that I think a study session might be great to help us better have a deeper understanding of the EEO plan.
So in response to that, that makes sense. And with the new Title V regulations that are currently being reviewed by the Department of Finance, colleges will submit their EEO plan, and the chancellor's office will provide feedback. That feedback must be read into the record at a general board meeting, so there will be an opportunity to hear what the chancellor's office has to say about our EEO plan, with the expectation that we would make changes to that in order to align with what the chancellor's office is looking for.
So Dr. Andrew-Jonas, do you think that there's any value in the board maybe having a study session before it goes to the chancellor's office, or do you think it's wait until it's already almost done and then hear what the chancellor's office has to say?
Well, there could be a study session ahead of time. I think the study session would be an opportunity to talk about what is the policy aspect of it versus what is the operational piece of it, and we certainly could have that conversation. And know that the chancellor's office will give feedback, so it'll be interesting to see once we have that draft or what we think is a final report or that goes to the chancellor's office and what they say back to us.
Well, so I make a recommendation to my fellow trustees. I think it would be valuable for us to have a study session before it goes to the chancellor's office, for us to have a better understanding and what our role could be in really promoting this. That's it. So I leave it to the calendar and whatever the board decides.
And then I'm also wondering, when are we due for our spring retreat?
You could do your spring retreat anytime you would like. So it could be the subject of your spring retreat, or at least a part of it, if you wanted to. January and early February was a little on the busy side, so we didn't have it in January as we sometimes do. So that's something
Maybe we should look at the calendar and send some dates out so we could get that schedule.
Yes, absolutely.
And that may be a good idea to have that part of it. Perfect. Okay, so any other thoughts before I know that before we adjourn, right? We are going to have a reading by our superintendent, president, and would that be as our adjournment
Yes,
statement?
actually, yes. PCC remembers Myron Tarkanian, a multi-sport athlete and coach who died Saturday near his Arcadia home. He was 81 years old. Tarkanian is the younger brother of fellow PCC Hall of Fame inductee and famed basketball coach Jerry Tarkanian. We remember him for coaching Lancers to championships in 4 separate sports: football, men's tennis twice, women's tennis, and men's soccer 3 times. His PCC coaching career spanned 5 decades. So I am asking that we adjourn our meeting in his memory.
This meeting is adjourned.